Okay guys, for this section of notes, guys, we're going to talk about 1-5, which is exploring angle pairs. This is when we have two angles and we have certain ways to be able to name them or know that they have certain things in common, okay? So the first one we're going to talk about are adjacent angles. Adjacent angles are two angles that have a common vertex, which would be like point A right here. That would be the common vertex there. And they also have a common side. The side, make sure you know it's the one in the middle. So what that means is they can have no common interior points. So if we're going to label these, it would be like angle 1 right here. And then also angle 2. So they're right beside each other, but there's not one inside of the other. They're just right next to each other. They share that one ray. All right? The next type we're going to talk about are vertical angles. Vertical angles are two congruent angles. Now, you need to make sure that you know that they are congruent, which means they're equal. It's our geometric way of saying equal to each other without giving them a number. But it's two congruent angles formed by intersecting lines. Think of it like scissors. If you open the bottom part of the scissors, the top part opens and vice versa, okay? So vertical means across from each other, so that would be like angle 1 and angle 2 are vertical, and also angle 3 and angle 4 would be vertical. And remember, we use our little arcs there to represent congruent. So down here at the bottom right, you would say vertical angles are congruent. All right? These are ones that you're going to see a lot. Now the key is with that is to make sure that this line is straight and this line is straight. If one of those two lines is not perfectly straight, then they are not vertical angles, and they will try to trick you with that a lot, all right? Next up, we have linear pair. A linear pair is a pair of adjacent angles whose non-common sides are opposite rays. The key right here says it all. Line, all right? So it's two angles that form a straight line. So that would be like angle in blue, and also the angle in red. Those two angles would end up forming a straight line, which we would call a straight angle. Now, you also need to know that they would add up to 180 degrees because they make a straight line. That's how many degrees would be in it, all right? Next up, we have complementary angles. And I don't mean angles that are being nice to each other. What I'm saying for that is it's two angles whose measure adds up to 90 degrees, all right? So if you look over here to the right, you'll notice this little box right here. That box tells us it's a right angle. When we have that right angle, we know that angle 1 and angle 2 would add up to 90. So they might say that this is 30, which means this angle would have to be 60 or something along those lines, okay? Which you also see in the one below where it says 1 and 2 are complementary, you have a 30 and a 60. They do not have to be adjacent for this to work, just adjacent helps us figure out numbers a little bit easier, okay? All right, for our next one, we have supplementary angles. This is two angles whose measures add up to 180 degrees. So unlike complementary, where it's at 90, supplementary is 180. This is your linear pair over here. This is your linear pair right here. What that does is you know without having to have numbers in there that 1 and 2 would add up to 180. Or in this case, you would have 40 and 140, knowing those add up to 180. There's an easy way to remember the difference between complementary and supplementary, which I teach a lot of kids. Complementary starts with a C. Supplementary starts with a S. Two things you can do with this. One, an S and a C. Well, a C is technically like half of S. So if S is 180, then you know that C would be half of it, which is 90. Another way is you could just add one line to each of these. That C easily turns into a 9, which would tell you 90. And this this S turns into an 8, which would give you 180. Just a little visual help if you want to use it. It's really up to you if you want to continue with that one, all right? All right. Next up, we're going to talk about perpendicular lines. You're going to hear perpendicular a lot throughout this year. A few pieces of information you need to know. Perpendicular lines intersect at 4 right angles, which means every angle over here to the right is 90 degrees, okay? Second, they intersect to form congruent adjacent angles, which means if this is 90, this is 90. They're equal, right? That should kind of go with the 4 right angles part. Next, segments and rays can also be perpendicular to lines and line segments. What that means is they don't have to go on forever and ever, okay? Next up, a right angle symbol indicates that the lines are perpendicular. Remember this little box right here? Tells us that it's 90 degrees, which would tell you that they're perpendicular. And then the upside down T right here, that is our symbol for perpendicular. So you might see us write something like line M is perpendicular to line N. All right, and you would read it just like that. All right? So make sure you know perpendicular 90 degrees. The last thing we're going to talk about in this section is an angle bisector. An angle bisector is a ray that divides an angle into 2 congruent angles. This means if I tell you that this line right here that's dotted is an angle bisector, then we know that these 2 pieces are congruent. So let's say I tell you that this angle over here is 20 degrees. That means this angle also has to equal 20 degrees. All right. It also could be a little bit different in that. So let's get rid of that. Here, they also probably could tell you that maybe the whole angle is 50 degrees. If you know the whole angle is 50, then you know each piece would have to be 25 because you would cut it in half. They could give you a problem with that in either way, so just be very careful with that. All right, that's our notes for section 1-5. I know those are pretty short, pretty cut and dry to the point. Tomorrow, make sure you're ready to add a little bit of algebra in with it, all right?